So the purpose of today's class was to show you how we can communicate with a database from a graphical user interface. Now, in our previous class, I have already covered this part, that we can actually connect to the database, we can retrieve data, we can insert data. So there were two methods right in here that we wrote for inserting data and retrieving data. Okay. So I'm going to assume that you understood this bit and move forward with a user interface through which we can process these things. If you look at this particular example, what we have in here, for each student we got the ID, name, address and phone number, if I recall right. Let me check. MySQL -u. What was the username? I think Spring 2018 Java. The host name is 172.17.10.52. We have to give a password which was JAVA, all in lowercase, so we are in. And then we can use the student DB. We can describe the student table to know what we exactly have. So we had ID, name, address, and phone. All right, and that's what we are going to use in our today's class. I think I told at the end of the last class that I would prepare the base code, but unfortunately I couldn't find any free time at all to do that. So I'll try to speed up the process. This is going to be DB. Excuse me, a graphical user interface demo. And I'll be stealing some of the codes that I wrote in our previous class. Now, since this is a GUI application, we'd have to create the interface at least. And that's not too difficult because we got Scene Builder. It's going to be a very simple form where we can throw in all these details, and that's probably going to be easier if you had a grid pane to start with, because then we can put in some labels, like this one would be for student ID, and we'd get another label for student name. Spelled it wrong. Okay, we'd have another one for address and the last one for phone. So we're supposed to add a row below, actually two rows below, and this is where we should add a, not phone here, but a label. So you should see where am I going with this thing. We'd have a bunch of text fields through which we can get the data, and there will be a button that lets us submit this thing, or let me just be specific. Add student says that you're going to add a new student. So let me fit this to the parent so that we got some more room in here, and let us adjust a little bit so that it looks a little bit better. I will give in some spacing all around. Not so much. And that's pretty much it for the initial interface. We will add more stuff to it in a bit. For each of these fields, we need to give appropriate, what's that called? Affix IDs. So this is going to be our ID field. This one may be the name field. Address field, and finally the phone one. And for this one we need an action handle add student action. this is very verbose, but it's okay. So we save all of that, and then we go back and make the controller. Okay. And this thing gets generated. We are no stranger to this. So you know that we will take this off, and that's pretty much it. We are good to go. Okay. If I run this project, I won't have anything except for the dummy interface in front of me. It's there. The idea is that we'll be supplying the ID, name, address, and phone, and then hit add student, and a student record will be created. It will get inserted into the database. Okay. Pretty much whatever we have done in our previous class, it's just that we have a new flavor to it. We get to see this nice window and everything. So if you notice that after we fill this in, the user is going to click on this add student, so the control actually goes down here in the handle add student action method. Okay, that's where we will go. Sorry about that. So for the console application that we wrote, let me show you what we did in here. That for inserting data, you see that we have written a method, and pretty much this is what we are going to execute in that add student action thing. It's just that we have some fixed data written in here. We were not reading from file or the console. So this is a fixed information that goes into the database. That was a very simple example. So if you understood that bit, it's not a big stretch really. We can take this piece and go into our controller, and right in here we can dump it all in. Pasting that. Okay. We don't have the user name, the password, the DB URL, all those things were defined in the other file. Okay. So that needs to be copied as well. You take that bit and put it somewhere, maybe up here. Okay. And now there is no compiler. But this is still going to insert that record of ongun.to right in there. That's not what we want. We want to get the ID from the text field. We want to get the name from the text field, and for the other two fields, the same thing. How do we do that? This is a string, right? So I guess this is going to be easier if I create separate objects. So to read the ID, we say ID field dot get text. We know how to do that. Name equal to ID, the name field dot get text. The address is equal to the address field dot get text, and the phone comes from phone field dot get text. By the way, NetBeans is pretty smart. If you type in the first few letters and hit Control space, it auto completes. Okay, so instead of supplying this ID, this fake ID, we're going to type in the ID, the name, the address, and the phone, and then the query goes in. However, if you look at the string itself, if you execute this, then something really bad is going to happen, that you're going to insert a record into the database that has specifically or literally ID, name, address, phone, these words written. We don't want that. We want the values from the variables. These are the literal words, right? So what do? We construct this string in such a way that the value of the variables come into place. So let me do this. Let me have this thing fail so that we can see what's happening. So let's say we have an ID, we have some name, some address, some phone. All right, I'm trying to insert this thing. I hit add student. It says some error happened, no suitable driver found. So that's a different error. Okay, and we went through this thing in our previous class, that for any DB application to work, you need to insert a driver. That you can do if you just go into libraries and hit add library, MySQL JDBC driver. You add that, and maybe this time around we'll be able to run this thing. I have one instance running. Let me close that if I can. I can click here, or I can do it from here. I hate that tooltip. Okay. So again, same example. Okay, so it says record inserted, right? But if you look at the record that's inserted, if you say select star from student, see the very last entry we got, we have ID, the word written, the name written, address, and phone. These things got written, but this is not what we wanted. We wanted some name in here, some address in here, and some phone in here. And this should have been 325 because that was the data. Okay, so we got to fix that over here. literally we are typing an ID, we don't want to do that. We can split this string into two halves like so. Okay, so this is two part. We can put a plus in here and then write the ID right in here. Is this thing clear? Okay, so we can actually insert the ID, and before the ID we have one part, after the ID we have another part. So if you need to get the name, that's how you get the name, and to get the address, we get the address, and okay, that was my mistake. And for the phone, finally, okay, so that's going to create the actual string, and we can insert this thing into our database. So let us try this out. See, we got 785 this record inserted. So the challenge right in here, in the graphical user interface that we had, is just to create the query in such a way that we can insert all the values that we read from the text fields. And there are quite a few things we need to do to make it more professional. We have to give the user some more feedback. For example, when the record gets inserted, we are printing this on console. But imagine that someone's using this thing as a desktop application. There won't be any console for that person. So this information that you're writing over here is of no use, and no one will get to see that. And also, we don't have any visual cue. So if I run this thing and I type in all the detail, I hit add student. After a student's record is inserted, this form should be cleaned off so that I can insert a new record, right? We talked about that before. So you should apply the same principle again. But another extra thing that you should add is a status bar. If a student addition is successful, you should report that to the client. So let us apply both those things right in here, because it's a good practice. Let me write a reset form method. It's going to be a very simple method. What it does, it clears everything, right? So ID field dot clear, the name field dot clear, the address and phone. Okay, so if the record is properly inserted, we say reset form, and that's that. It cleans up the form, and at the same time, we need some help over here. We have to have a status bar, so I'm going to do that right there. A status bar is nothing but a label for us, although status bar can have other items. Okay, we're going to make sure that it covers the entire area. That's how we say that it's always going to grow horizontally, and it's going to take all the columns that's given. The maximum width of this thing is the max value. So that way, with all those three things, you see that it goes from the left all the way to the right. Is this thing clear? Now I need to give it an AFX ID, and let me clean this off. Oh, not here. So I'll just say that this is our status label, and to keep the user informed, what we can do right when we started, okay, or well, actually not when we started. We're connecting to the database, and these things, these messages, they're going out in the console, but they're not of any use. So instead of doing so, we say status label dot set text. Okay, and it's going to work if we save this thing first and then also make the controller. Otherwise, no one would know what a status label is. Okay, so one more time. See, with that we managed to clean this out, and it says record inserted, so the user is informed in that way, and it actually got inserted. And that's a good thing, that you're telling the user that something happened properly. But it's more important to let the user know when something doesn't happen properly. That's when you should show an error message, you should show a dialog. Okay. I'd like to leave that in your hand. See, we got a try catch, right? In the catch part, you should do something to show the alert. Okay. And let's see if you can do it on your own, and let me know if you fail. Right, just search on Google how you can generate these alerts on JavaFX. It's only 2 or 3 lines of code that will let you create alert boxes. So very easy. You should find some samples. Just grab the code from there and insert it over here. That should be. Excuse me. What I wanted to do over here, to make sure that this is a full-fledged example. So we got the student insertion done, right? What if I wanted to show a list of students or a table of students? How do we do that? Yeah, the list view, the table view, we are going to use those. But let me start by splitting this thing. We got another ankle pain. Maybe I want it here. So on the left side, what I would want to do is I want to show a list of all the students. Okay. That means I want a list view in here. Let us make sure that it looks nice. Okay, so that's the entire list view right in here. And let us say that this is going to be student list view. Okay, so we are going to see all the students in a list. Now, what are the things we need to do here? Help me out. I mean, it's fine and dandy that we got a student list view right in here. It's not going to work. If I run this project, I'd like to see all the list of students that are already in my database, but I don't see anyone. We need an observable list, yes. Thank you. What else? I got to import this. What should be the type over here in the question mark? Student, because this list is going to show students. This has to be the type. It's just that we don't have any student type created. So what should be the next step? Obviously, create this data type. It's a very simple data type. Yeah, so why not? Plus student. What are the things we need? We need the ID, the name, the address, and the phone. All right. So I'll let NetBeans do the rest. So we get a constructor where we can supply all these 4 parameters, so that we can create a student record, and then the getters and setters if needed. Let me get all the getters. And just so you see that something is different, let us have 2 setters for the address and the phone, so that we can change them if we need. Okay, so the getSet methods are in place. We should also have a toString. And for now, let's say whenever we are talking about a student, we only need to see the name of the student. So we return the name. So that's a very simple student data type that we just created. Is this thing clear? Now, how do we ensure that whenever we add anything to the student list, it gets viewed in the list view? Well, for that we have to do 2 things. First of all, we need to instantiate the list. How do we do that? fx collections dot, all right. Observable array list, if that's what you want to create. So that's done, and then we have to say that the list has to show these items. So student list view dot set items, which is down here, and the items are going to come from the student list. Okay. So, okay, all right. Before I get there, let me move this thing a little bit to the side. The split pane itself, we can put it in a anchor pane, say fit to parent, and then we can control the anchor pane itself. I had a bit of issue with the labels. We couldn't see the labels there. That's why I wanted to make some more room in here. Now it should look a little bit better. Okay, so we got a list view, we got a form in here. I wanted to see all these students. Okay, right now we don't see any record at all, but you'd see that if we add a single student, say student, there is a student called S equal to new student. That's the name of that student, whatever is the address, and then we have the phone number. It's a bad example, but that'll do. So in the student list, if we add this thing, if we add this student S, that should also appear in our list view. And that's exactly what we see. So that tells us already that in order to show all these students in that list, what we need to do is we need to connect to the database, read all the student records, create student objects, and insert them as we go into that student list. So it's a pretty simple process. You need to know the basics, how we connect to the database, how we read the ID, the name, and the address and the password. Once we do that, we can create a new student and then insert that to the list. And this is exactly what we did in our previous class. So that again gives me an opportunity to steal my own code, which is such a nice thing. So yeah, pretty much this part. Okay, so we copy this from here because this is what we are doing, right? And we paste that. See, right now we are reading the student ID and student name, but this is not going to be enough. Address is how you read it, result set.get string the address, and also the phone number is right here. And the rest of the thing we have covered before, that we connect to the database and then we run a query, select star from student, that would select all the students, and then we run a while loop to go through each and every record and get these students. See, this is exactly what we need right now, because as we are reading these students, I know the ID. It's coming from the database. I don't have to give mumbo jumbo like this. The student ID comes over here, student name goes there, the address and the phone. We read that right from the database. So we create a student record called S, and that gets inserted where? To the student list, and that also means that it will show up into the list view. So if I were to run this thing now, it's a nice little graphical user interface that shows me all these things. Okay. And in one of our previous classes, I showed you that if you select one of the items from here, you can make sure that it appears in a form. We know how to do that. So I'll skip that bit if you want to add that thing over here. So for example, I can select a student from here, I can bring it up over here, make changes to the address or phone if needed, and then save the results somehow. Okay. But when we save the results now, we saw the example with FileIO. This time this is going to be different. We have to save it to the database. So those things, those minor details will change, but the actual design will pretty much remain the same. When we are working with the database though, a lot of data will come in tabular format. So this is not really a good representation. I mean, it may serve some of the purposes if you want to show only one column. So if I'm showing the name column, then that's fine. But if I go here, I don't know the address or the phone number or the ID of any of these students, and that can be a problem. What if I wanted to see all of that in one go? That's where we see that JavaFX has a very nice solution to that. And I'm going to wrap this thing again in a split pane, but this split pane I want to do it vertically. So it's going to be a split pane of split panes, and it's not too confusing. Maybe. Let me show you exactly what I wanted to do. So I got the list of student, I got a tiny little form in here, and down here I want to have a a table with 4 columns, the ID, name, address, and phone. That's going to be this place. And of course, I'd want to make this thing a bit bigger so that I have a bit more room for the entire thing. Okay. Now, in most applications, if you have a list in here, you shouldn't have a table view. This is just to show you that all these things can work at the same time in the same place. Okay. So depending on your need or the user experience, you'd have to customize this. I'm just showing you that you can actually put them together. So we know about list view already. It shows a list of items. But to get multiple columns, list view is not going to be enough. That's where we need something called table view. Okay. And this table view, I want to throw that in here. And it should look pretty. With a bit of spacing all around. And let me fill this out with sample data so that you guys can see it better, what I really am trying to build. Does this make sense? So you get a list view. This would be the list of students, and maybe we can click over here so that we can get the detail. Or we can use this as a blank form, insert some values in here, hit add student, and that would get into the database. Down here we got a table which right now has 2 columns, but you can probably imagine that we can add 2 more columns over here, so we have 4 things at the same time. Is this thing clear? Is this view clear? Now, one thing that you'd see that the table view has 2 columns because we got 2 table columns. So if you needed more table columns, it's very simple, just drag and drop them, right? So drag and drop them just like that. And the name of those columns, you can write them as you want. So this can be the student ID, and maybe I need that much space for a student ID. Student name goes here, so we need to make some space for that. Maybe the name will take that much space. I got a lot of room left on the right side, so why not use that? This one's for phone, and this one's for address. Maybe I left too little room for address, but that's again something you can customize by yourself. Okay. So with that thing done, you see how it looks like. We have 4 nice columns, and perhaps we'll be able to fill it in with the actual details that we got from the database. We will read the ID, the name, the address, and the phone. Okay. So that's the target. And actually that's how the view would look like once we are done. Now, how do we access this entire thing? First of all, we have to give them names so that we can write our programs and talk to them as needed. So this table view, let us give it a easy to remember name. This is going to be our student table view. So you have 2 things. One is student list view, and the other one is this one, student table view. Okay. And for each of these columns, let us give them some more names as well. This is going to be our ID column. That's the name column. Then we have the address column, and finally the phone column. Is it all right? So now that you have those things in place, it's time to update our controller. You see that these are the things we have already, and once we hit make controller, we see a few more things appearing. So just like we have a list view, now we have a table view, and initially it comes with a question mark right in here. Okay. So you're going to see how we interact with this. And I'll start slow. Start with the most obvious thing. This table is about students, so the data type that we will fill it in with is student. Let me run this thing without doing anything at all. What does it say? No content in table. So right now, this thing is not hooked to the list. That's why we see no content in table. However, you see there is this line, student list view dot set items student list. This pretty much says that the student list view, it's going to pull data from the student list. And we can do the same thing down here. We can say student table view dot the same thing, set items, and that's going to be the student list. So previously it was complaining about no content, but this time that's gone. We don't see anything yet, we don't see the values, but you can actually see that the rows are here. Okay. Is this thing clear? Now we got to tell what exactly we're going to show in this column, in this one, and the next two columns. Because JavaFX has no way to know whether I'm going to show the name first and then the address, or the ID first, then the name and the address and the phone. Okay, we haven't said anything about that over here. And that's where we have to define each of these columns. Let me start slow. We have two question marks here, and you got to understand why we need two. The first thing will tell you from which class you're going to get the data from. It's a student class. And what are you trying to show? What type of data is it? Is it a number? Is it a string? You have to tell that. So it's going to be a string for us because our ID, those are left as varchar, and we read that with string. If we read that with long, or if we read that with integer, then the type that you'll be using over here is called number, n with uppercase and the rest in lowercase. So over here we are using string instead. Okay. So as we are reading this thing, I mean, we have said this thing, we have told Java that read from the student list and show the data in the list view and also the table view. But how does it actually show the data? This is where I'll take a leap. I'm not going to explain the entire thing because it needs a lot of previous knowledge, which is not possible for me to cover right now. I'm going to use something called lambda expressions. Okay. So we're dealing with the ID column. Let me write it out. Let me see if I remember this right. So we have to get the cell value factory. No. Actually set the cell value factory. So for each data, we have to get the student record out of it. We have to get the ID because that's what we are trying to show. Okay, and this thing needs to be put into a something called a simple string property. I'll talk about it in a bit. But let me make sure that this thing actually works. some error somewhere. What? Oh, that was silly. It's really weird. Do we see the student IDs? Now let us look into this in a little bit more detail. What I did in here and how does that work. See, the target is that we have multiple columns and we have to tell Java exactly how it's going to get the data for each of those columns. All right. We have multiple records, we have multiple rows to read. But what we are going to do is we are going to define a rule for one column, and that's going to cover all the rows. So here's this thing, a method called setCellValueFactory that defines how the value of the cell is going to be set. How you're going to read that. So for whatever data, the data we are reading is each of those rows. For each of those data, we're going to get the value, which gives us the student object, and from there we can access the ID or the name or the address. Whatever we need, we can access that. Okay. The only thing that may be a little bit confusing over here is this new simple string property. Why do we even need that? So when we talked about this observable list thing, right after introducing array list, we're not using array list in here. If you notice that since we have to work with list view and also table view, we cannot use array list over here. We have to use observable list. The reason for that is that the list can change in time, right? We can add more items to the list. We can take out items from the list. And the views, the table, the list view, all these views need to be updated right away. So this is where we use observable list, because someone is observing the list view and the table view. They're observing, they're listening for changes. If anything changes in the list, I will update this thing. So in the same way, when you work with this table columns, what happens over here is that the value of the ID may change. Now the ID is a fixed thing, it shouldn't change, right? But this is a general model, that whatever you're showing in the table, the content of the table, the values themselves, they may change. And if they change, you should update the view right away. For example, I changed the address of a student by, let me run this thing. That's easier for me to explain when you have the view. So let's say I click on Mohammad Rakibul Hassan, I see all these details, I see this address and maybe that's wrong, so I update this thing and hit the save button. So when I do that, that goes to the database, that's fine, but it should also update this table as well. It should update the address field of that particular record right away, because if it doesn't do so, the user will get confused, because the user will think that I have updated this thing and I don't see it in the table, so maybe it didn't get updated. The user is going to come over here and click over here again and see that it indeed got updated, but this table doesn't show that. So that's a big problem in terms of user experience if you follow that cycle. However, when you have something called simple string property or a string property, what happens is that it also listens for changes. String data type itself doesn't listen for changes, but the string property they do. So if you make any changes to the string, then the table itself will update that thing automatically. And that's something you need. So over here, we're not making those changes, or maybe we will, depending on the application itself. But this is the general model that whenever you set a cell value factory, okay, you have to wrap it around in a string property because the value can change. Okay. So let me complete this example. I got 4 columns, right? One is for ID, the next one's for name, and then we have the address and the phone. So why is it complaining? Because I haven't defined the types. I've only done it for one, but I haven't done it for the other ones. So student, you're going to read the record for a student. And you're going to show a string. And like I said, if it's a numeric data, you'd say number like this. Alright, so now the errors are gone, and if I run this thing, that would be awkward because in all these columns I see nothing but the ID. Because I just copy pasted, and this is easy to fix. I want to show the name, the address, and the phone. So we got everything in here in the proper order. Is this example clear to you? So if I ask you to write a database application in this way, that you show the data in a tabular format, you should be able to do that. You should be able to add new record to the database as well. Right. I'm going to leave a homework for you, that every time we add a new record, it actually goes to the database all right, but it doesn't update the table. It doesn't update the list we got in here. And let us just look at this quick example. Alright, so this is a random student that I'm trying to insert. I hit add student, it says record inserted. Do we see anything about that student anywhere? Is it here? No. However, if I run this application again, see, the missing student is here. So do we see the problem? I mean, that's exactly what will throw the users off. The user will add this thing, and I report to the user that, yeah, well, I have added this student. Everything's fine, but I don't see it here in the table. So what's missing? Right? Think about this thing. What should we do to make sure that it appears over here in the list and also in the table? That's going to be the homework. The solution is very easy, but I don't want to give it away. All right, so two homeworks. And by the way, you can expect some questions in the final exam based on some of these homeworks. It's been the same way with the midterm and everything else. So try these out, okay? And any other homework that I may use from time to time, try those out. Any question about any of these? Can we do this thing? Okay, if we can, I'm going to leave you 2 programming assignments on the same topic. It's the banking software. We'll do it in 2 ways, with file input output and also with the database. Okay, that's going to be the task. Right. This is unfortunately our last class, and in this semester the classes got affected with a lot of holidays on Thursdays and Saturdays, so that was probably a bad choice on my part to schedule it here. Actually, I didn't do that, the scheduler did, but we got affected anyways. Our exams are starting from 26th. Many of you will not have an exam on that day, but well, the classes will end before that, so I can't do anything after that. We do have a lab class which I do want to take. We will have this class, right? And we can see a few things related to database, and I'll also talk about the lab exam question pattern and what to expect with that. The lab exam was scheduled for May 9th, right? And I mentioned that already, that we will postpone that. We'll have it on 10th because we have the final exams running till 9th. But at the same time, if some of you may need to leave early, go out of Dhaka, please let me know and we can do something else about it. So yeah, what I was saying is that this semester the classes got affected a lot, and I only had like 16 or 17 classes, which is a lot less than what I would have expected. Like 22 would have been maybe ideal. We are still 5 classes short. So I got a lot of content to cover, and I can't do that before the exam. I will do that after the exams are done, after May 15th. That also means that these topics, I will lecture the classes voluntarily, and it's also up to you whether you want to show up or not. But the topics are important, really. Like if you go into the next courses, like if you go into operating system, if you go into say databases or networking even. Like I'm not going to talk about databases, but networking and operating system level concepts, like stuff about thread, stuff about client server model. You need to have some idea from this course before you go into that one. Those are high level courses. So those classes will be voluntary, and I will also be video recording them and uploading them. So if you cannot come over here, it's because you're not in Dhaka anymore. That's understandable. But if you're free, yeah, please try to attend those. I'll try to schedule those classes at some convenient time. I mean, we won't have any classes, so there is no question of clashes anymore. But that's the only thing I can offer. Because I don't really want to push in makeup classes right now. Maybe I would have done that either. It's just that we have this IQSA thing knocking on the door on 25th, 24, 25, and 26. So there will be external visitors coming over here to assess our quality. So you guys need to be present. Right? Not about this class, because we won't have classes, right? This Java course will be done, but for other courses, if you have classes, make sure that you are there, because they're going to go from class to class randomly, and if they see that the students are not coming, and that's a bad impression. Okay. Also, make sure that you wear your student ID when they're there. I don't see it on you guys, but they have to see that. Make sure that you're dressed up in a decent manner, and they will actually talk to you. So whatever they're asking, you guys can answer. Some of these things we will also talk about in our meeting tomorrow. We have a meeting with the existing students. For those of you who are interested, I posted on Facebook about this thing. Okay, we'll have that in the seminar hall. Okay. All right, so that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, thanks. Totally forgot about that. Okay, so let me write this out. while we are at it, let me. Oh, sorry. Let me pause the video for a bit. So this is pretty much all database related questions, because I haven't covered networking or non-threading. Otherwise, there will be some questions from there that angle. I'm planning to pose 4 questions. One would be just as a giveaway. So you'd be asked to draw a user interface like you did for the midterm. But this is probably going to be something related to the databases. So it will have some list or tables or anything as such. I'll give you a question. This is not related to Java really, but this is something we have covered. So some simple SQL statements, either to create a table, or it can be a bunch of those things. Create database, create table, how to insert the data, how to retrieve data. There will be a very easy question, again pretty much a giveaway thing, to connect to a database. That's where you establish the connection with the driver manager and everything. So I'll give you the specific parameters. What's the host name, what's the name of the database, what's the username, and what's the password. And based on all of that, you should be able to write the connection string and write the code needed for connecting to the database. The very last question, this can be a little bit tricky. I'll give you a narration, I'll give you a paragraph. You'll find all the descriptions about what sort of data we are going to insert. And based on that, you'd have to write your queries. So you're going to write a Java code that will insert data into a table or retrieve data from a table. But the table itself, you'd have to understand how that is formed based on the narration. So if you look at the previous semester's question, you'll see that there are some long paragraphs where we have a description of a particular thing. It would be something as such. Any question about any of these things? So alright, so I'm going to allow you to bring a cheat sheet if you need to use one, but make sure that you have it signed by me. Alright. Anything else about the exam? No? Alright. So let me post this and then we're done.